Well, hey there, Emily. Thank you so much for joining me today for the Confident Sober Women podcast. I'm so excited to have you here and share you with my audience. So, I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you share a little bit more about your story, and then we're going to chat.
Thank you very much for having me, Shelby. I appreciate it. Um, so, my story is not unlike most people's stories who, you know, tried to get sober or do get sober. It's like I grew up in a very lovely family. My father was an Episcopal priest. My mother was one of the smartest people I ever met, but they were both deeply troubled human beings. And so life at home was um, kind of iffy. I equate it to the movie Ordinary People, which was, it's nice, it's nice, you know, um, nice people, but the undercurrents is dark. Anyhow, so suffice it to say, I ran away into the world of dance and ballet, and that pretty much probably saved my life um, until it didn't work anymore. And, I was sitting on my bedroom floor in my duplex apartment in West Hollywood with a gun in my mouth. I was 42 years old, and I was, you know, I was miserable. I had things. I had a good job. I had a lovely apartment. I had a nice car, and I was miserable, absolutely miserable. And I pondered that moment with the gun in my mouth of like, okay, click, I'm dead. It won't be pretty. There'll be guts all over the walls, etc. Um, they'll find me probably in a couple of days. That won't be pretty. It might smell bad. My poor sisters, all that kind of stuff. Um, and then I had what I think was my first spiritual experience, which was, but if I don't kill myself, um, anything is possible. I can't make a mistake because if I kill myself, I'm dead and it's all over. If I don't, how can anything I do be worse than that? So I got up and took my drugs to my next door neighbors and said, here, I'm an addict, and poured out all the booze that was in the kitchen, took a shower, and sat around and waited for 5 hours for the first AA meeting that I knew of, which was literally around the corner. Um, and and basically that's what really. I mean, I had been around AA a little bit before. I mean, I had known for, I remember the minute I spent like 16 years in New York City when I was dancing and pursuing that dance career, and I have a visceral memory of standing in my apartment while I was cleaning house and going, "Oh, I'm a drug addict." Um, it took me many years to admit that I was also an alcoholic because I had the old man trench coat vision of that, and I was, just didn't relate to it. Um, anyhow, so I had tried to go to AA at one point, but that was really about a girl. I'm gay, um, and I wasn't really ready to get sober, but she was sober, and anyhow. So, but I wasn't ready. So, I think I've also been um, rather suicidal a lot of my life and I think that fits in with um, because I couldn't stand the way I felt. And I think this is very much um, a common um, feeling in alcoholics and addicts and that's why we drink and use, is because we can't stand the way we feel. And which is why drugs and alcohol are such a relief. because they change the way you feel immediately. Um, so anyhow, that started my path to a sobriety that really worked. Um, I'm sorry, were you going to ask me a question?
Mm-mm.
No, okay. Um, so, um, and I think it was also the bottom that I needed because I'm too arrogant and willful, and I'm a type A, you know, I can do that, go get them, self-made girl, and the idea, you go sit down in an AA meeting and you look up at the wall and you see the word powerless. And it's like, I'm not fucking sorry. I tend to swear. I'll try not to. Um, I'm not powerless. I'm not. And then there's God. And, my daddy was an Episcopal priest. I grew up in church. Um, I love the art, the architecture, the music, all of that. But I didn't see a lot of God there, especially when my father was beating my mother up and, she was fending him off with a knitting needle. So, but because I had gone from here to an AA meeting, it's kind of like, people talk about it as the last house on the block. I had nowhere else to go. It was that or kill myself. So I sat there. And it's also why I have a real opinion about it's important, that there's coffee and a cookie because, I went to a meeting, I got a cup of coffee and a cookie, and I could stand there with my coffee and my cookie and feel like I had something to do and how to fit in. Anyhow, so um, I made friends. I got um, people were nice to me, and I listened to the stories. God, I love the stories. I love I love listening to alcoholics talk because I relate to other alcoholics and the car crashes and some people have crazy stories of guns and ending up in trees and other countries and things like that. That's not exactly me, but I love the stories. So I sat and I listened to other people talk, and I learned, but it was very slow for me, very slow for me. Um, so um, it, I get the feeling that you don't want me to base this too much around just AA, right?
Well, that's the way you got sober. So
Yeah.
I think that's really powerful and important. And everybody, like I got sober just a little bit after you. My anniversary was actually a couple weeks ago. And so when I got sober in 2002, there was nothing else except for rehab and AA and 12 step. That's all we had.
Okay.
Now we have modern day recovery with Quitlet and online spaces and programs and all kinds of stuff. We have a wealth of materials at our fingertips that we just did not
Right.
have, like when I got sober. So similar to you, I got sober in AA because that's what we had.
Right.
Um, Today, there's a lot of other ways to do it. And so a lot of times what I say around here is I don't necessarily care how you got sober if it works for you, it's just that, living that alcohol-free life and kind of restoring yourself to sanity was the result. So,
Right.
yeah.
Okay. So, um, you know what I've learned in Alcoholics Anonymous, what I've learned through sobriety is, AA uses the structure of the steps, right? And, you know, powerless and, find a higher power and, look at all your past mistakes and look at your character and clean it up and then help others. That's my quick, like 1 through 12. Um, and I had a sponsor when I was 10 years sober who basically said, the steps are about cleaning out what's between you and God. And I would paraphrase that a little bit at the steps I think are about cleaning out what's between you and other people, you and humanity. Um, because we carry around a lot of old bad behavior and shame and things um, that we are ashamed of and that we used to beat ourselves up with. And so, I think I spent the first 10 years trying to clean up that and how I walked through the world. And then at 10, I think it's where I made the real jump to having more of a spiritual life and understanding that that was sort of the be all and end all to it. There's a book called As Bill Sees It, and there's a piece in there about that's called the Keystone of the Arch. And the keystone of the arch is that sort of um, parallelogram. Well, it's not a parallelogram. Okay, my geometry is bad. That stone in the middle where the whole arch comes up and rests on that stone. And you have to keep the framing in there until that last piece is set in. And then the rest of the pieces will bear on that centerpiece and you can take the framing away. Um, so um, that's what that's what working the steps has done for me, and it's like when I work with other people, I talk about going through the steps and that each one of them is like putting a tool in your toolbox. It's like I'm powerless over alcohol. My life has become unmanageable. It's like I am not a powerless girl. I am a kick-ass type A. Show me the goal and I will get it done. Aries, go getter. Um, but the truth is, there is an element of powerlessness that is really quite useful, especially to the alcoholic. It's like you're powerless over everything. You're powerless over what other people do and say. You're powerless over traffic. You're powerless over, what's available in the grocery store. You're powerless over whether the Amazon man shows up or not. It's like you are powerless over absolutely everything. So it's basically how react and respond and swing with the punches that life can bring, right? I came to find um, a spiritual life, a higher power, whatever you want to call it, in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Um, Growing up in church, it's like the whole dude on the cloud, um, and Jesus on the cross and all of that. It's like it just didn't hit pay dirt with me. But sitting in a room full of other people like myself, where everyone had a common goal and everyone's talking and sharing their sort of innermost thoughts and feelings and secrets. Um, there was a camaraderie, a communion, if you will, that happens there. And it's something I powerfully felt. Um, it's the connection I think that we lack sometimes as alcoholics. And that's what I lacked. And that's what's been very much key to me. Because, you know, I hate to say this, but it's true. It's like I hated myself. I really, I had done things. I had a lot of achievements in my life, but I don't think I really liked myself. Um, I don't, I was very defensive and very hostile and and AA sort of helped temper me and just make me part of the group. I didn't have to be in charge. I didn't have to, run the show. Um, yeah, it gave
Mhm.
me community, which I think is a lot of what's lacking in the world these days.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Mm.
so,
Thank you so much for sharing all that. I really appreciate that. And so vulnerably, that's really how all of this works is when we learn how to recover out loud. We really do become helpful and create opportunities for other people who are still out there seeking ways to rebuild their sanity through sobriety. So I really appreciate that. And it's a powerful story. I really appreciate the desperation that you shared. That story about kind of holding the gun and being suicidal. I mean, that just speaks, I think, to what all of us can relate to, whether you've sat in a million AA meetings or not, or you've been around. I'm pretty sure you can probably relate to that level of desperation where you're just, you know, at the end. And I hear people say a lot, I didn't want to die, but I didn't want to live either. And so,
right.
like, I think that jumping off place for most of us and what gets us to the places where hopefully we can learn to get sober. So that I think relating to that feeling it's always really powerful for me when I hear that part of people's stories, because I definitely I was a depressive drunk as well, I had two suicide attempts, and it's definitely a horrible thought and feeling too now being 20 whatever years out now, and to think back that that's the way I was thinking about myself or feeling is it's so sad. It just hurts my heart. My life is like a million times different, probably like yours. I have
Oh my
three
God.
young adult children. I was
But I really needed that. That's
mhm,
what I say about a bottom. I really needed that to be teachable, to
right.
be desperate enough to be willing to say, okay, I know nothing.
Yeah.
I don't know anything. Everything I'm doing doesn't work. So
Mhm.
I'll just sit here, be quiet, try to learn and try to do it a different way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what it takes. So most of the time when I talk to people, in my experience working with lots of other individuals who have done what we have done, they share a common experience around kind of after we get and stay sober for a while, for like a year or more, and then that like 1 to 5 year range, there's really this kind of awakening that starts to happen. The fog is like really lifted, there's clarity. Obviously we're as sober as we're ever going to get at that time, but we're also starting to see like, wow, I have opportunities now that weren't available to me when I was in active addiction. Or maybe I would like to, start a business or have a baby or leave my partner or, whatever, start a drawing class. I don't know. There's things that just come up. We start to realize like, oh, okay. I can do certain things. And I was just curious if you can relate to that, like if you had that experience and kind of what that was like for you.
Um, I think in I had already done so much, in terms of the achievement level. It's like I'd been a classical ballerina, I'd had a career there. Then I went into the fitness industry. I owned a gym in New York for 12 years. That was a big deal.
Hmm.
Then I worked for another company in the fitness industry, and they transferred me to Los Angeles to open their sort of flagship on the West Coast. Then I ditched all of that, um, and went into the construction industry. I know, but classical ballerina to construction manager. It's an odd path, but it makes sense if you hear the whole story. Um, you know, and and so I think, what so I'd always been able to do things, um, but it was really the interpersonal skills that were the growing part for me, and the emotional regulation that was the growing part for me. Um, the I mean, hell, I just wrote a book. It's like I've been a dancer, a gym owner, a construction manager, and now I'm an author. It's like, and sobriety has brought me to this place of, and I don't think with ego, but just with put one foot in front of the other and try, see if you can do it. Go to friends, get help. What do you think? Here, read my book. Do you hate it? Um, so I don't know that I've answered your question, but um, and also my sobriety was slow. You know, I'm 27 years sober, and it's taken a village, and growing for me has been slow. At least the important parts, the emotional parts. You know.
I when you said that the first time, I really related to that too, because I feel like that was my story too. I was not somebody who came to the rooms thinking like, oh, I think I should get sober or I have a problem with alcohol. That's not my story. I was definitely like not at all interested in doing that or thought that any of that was I knew I was crazy and that I had a lot of problems, but I didn't think alcohol had anything to do with it. And so personally just didn't think that that was the solution. But that's where I landed. And I followed directions because I was too scared not to. And I was on the verge of losing a whole bunch of stuff. And so I kind of was in that space for a long time. I remember sitting in those rooms thinking like, "Oh, I don't belong here. This is ridiculous." I was in rehab and I never even unpacked my bag because I was like, "Oh, they're gonna come pick me up. I don't that this is they made a mistake." But that's not usually what happens when people end up in rehab. Like usually normal drinkers don't end up in rehab. So
Yeah.
that's not what happened for me. And so for like 18 months though, I was like still doing that. I was still like I did the things because I was too scared not to, but I was like I don't really know. This is my story.
You were still seeing the differences.
I was like, I don't, my story isn't really that bad. I didn't really have all that stuff going on. And so it was a very slow burn for me too. And I only bring that up, and I don't mean to take up your time because I want to hear more from you, but I sometimes I share like, I remember sharing at my so I got sober, and then 6 months later, I got pregnant, and I had 3 kids in 4 years. So it was like a very, very chaotic experience. It was one that I chose. I loved it. I was like very exciting, but then I had to do things kind of backwards because by year 4, I was like having like a sober bottom, because I really
Right.
had I'd done the work, but I hadn't done all I had to restart. So by year 10, I was like in the midst of this big, huge life with all of this stuff, and like I remember celebrating at my anniversary, and I was really pissed off. Like I was mad because I felt like I should have been further along. Why am I still having to do this crap? It's been 10 years. This is ridiculous. And I like that's how I was talking, and I think about that so often and how hilarious it is because I'm just like, what is wrong with you? But like, I mean, I was grateful for my life. I knew I had a blessing. I knew all of that, but I felt like I should have arrived more. I don't know. I felt like it should have just been easier or I could have handled things better. I don't know what I thought, but it clearly wasn't well or all the way. But it was just a reminder of me of like how slow things are. That was 10 years sober, right? I'm still
Well,
like
they
complaining.
call it peeling the onion, you know,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think it's such a good analogy because, it's layers on layers on layers. I mean, when I was a year sober, it's like I started to date. We very quickly, got you know, serious and moved in together. You know, within 6 months, we bought a house together, renovated that house. 3 years later, sold it, bought another one, renovated that house. I changed careers into the construction industry. It's like, um, I went from being a year sober to having this huge life,
Hmm.
right? And the second house was a house in the Hollywood Hills, and I'm working in construction management, and with the company car and the six-figure salary and
Hmm.
all of that stuff, and yet at 10 years, and people talk about this, it's like at 10 years, oh, this is the good part. I got fired from my big job, and they took away my phone and my company car and my laptop and everything and sent me home with a banker's box, you know, and fired into the Great Recession of 2018. And, I called my sponsor and, told him my sad story. And he said, go to a meeting. And I literally took the phone and shoved it against my butt and screamed, fuck you. It's like, what does that have to do with what just happened to me? It had everything to do with what just happened to me because I needed to go back and really focus on my sobriety and me growing as a person rather than focusing on all of the outside things of the job and the house and the relationship and all of those things. I had to set my priority, and my priority really was first and foremost to stay sober and work on that and my sober life and my spiritual life. So um,
Yeah.
there's a lot. That onion still peels, you know, and I'll unless you want me to be quiet, the tail end of that is after 22 years at the end of the pandemic, she said, I want a divorce. Bye, see you later. And I mean, I was stunned from out of nowhere, right? And what's interesting was I didn't think about drinking. All I could think about was killing myself because once again, I needed to make those feelings stop. I couldn't stand the way I felt. And, I was sober long enough that it kind of boggles me that I didn't think about drinking, but I 5150'd myself. I put myself in the nut house um, because I needed to look at that and how I had gotten there. And also I needed to go and get some outside help because, a lot of us do need outside help to look at, causes and conditions and the underlying issues.
Oh
So,
yeah, 1,000,000%. I mean, that's something that I talk about constantly, like here on the show, and then also I'm a mental health therapist, so I work with people, kind of every day, and mostly people who are in recovery or around recovery because you can't get away from addiction. Like everybody has something. So
right.
many of the people that I work with are, either were raised by one or are living with one or are raising one. And so that's something that we talk about quite a bit is just we don't ever really arrive. Like
No,
the work never, the growth in the work never really ends. And I'm really grateful for that today. Like today I can really see like, oh wow, I'm super grateful for that because I don't want to just like be stunted ever. But there are periods of time that come up when we are just, hit and punched in the face with life that's really, really painful. And I mean, I went through that during the pandemic. We had three teenagers who were in total, one of which was in total crisis, and the second one, I mean, we lived in crisis for like 4 years, sustained trauma. And it was a very, very difficult time. I mean, I talk about it a lot. Like we had to make some decisions that I just were some of the hardest things I've ever made done in my whole life. And it doesn't make any of that stuff easier, but sobriety certainly does make things easier. It's a lot easier to show up and do those kinds of things when you aren't under the influence of drugs and alcohol or whatever else you might be using to numb out. And I just think that it's wonderful to be at this place now where I know for certain 100,000,000% that like this is the easier, softer way. Um,
absolutely.
doesn't mean
Absolutely.
that like we're not going to look for easier ways sometimes. Like, of course we are. That's the human experience is to look for the way out, and my natural
Well,
way is to look for a way out to
it
escape.
made me dig deeper.
Hmm.
It's like this, this was absolutely a crisis in my life of, getting divorced. And, it made me dig deeper. It made me go to therapy and finally find a therapist who, wasn't, that I couldn't fascinate and who was no bullshit. And, and then I was like, oh, I'm drawn to crazy people
Hmm.
because that's what I grew up with. It feels like home. And then this led me to um, um, writing this book, which was an absolute accident. I literally was looking for something to do rather than clean house. And I started, because I'm Irish, I'm a big storyteller. So, but really I wrote it because I needed to understand, how did I get here? So I kind of wrote it all down. And in the midst of writing it all down, I was telling all those stories that I've been telling for years,
Mm-hmm.
but I needed to understand it, who I was and how I was, and that's turned into me publishing a book. So, you don't know where life is going to take you, and it's an absolute adventure, and
Mm-hmm.
none of this would have happened without me getting and being sober and being willing to look at these things and wanting to look at these things.
Yeah. Totally agree with that. And I do think that age is a wonderful thing in this way too. Like as we age, my experience anyway, and many of my peers I know, we are more wise. We are different. We have more life experiences. We have more of those opportunities to experience the horribleness of life under our belt, right? So we've kind of
Right,
built that perseverance muscle over a long period of time versus like, my 20-year-old kids who are just kind of at the beginning of that. Not that they haven't had their own pain, but they haven't had as much. So they don't have as much experience to know that like, oh, wow, I actually can handle things that are really hard. And oh, by the way, I'm also not going to die or implode or any of that if my feelings are hurt, or
right,
if I have experiencing discomfort, because by the way, most of life is pretty uncomfortable. And
yeah,
so I know now at almost tomorrow's my birthday, actually 50, I'll be 50. And like now I know, like
right,
I don't, I'm really pretty unbothered by most things in life because that's the level of peace and contentment I have today, because
right,
most things won't compare at all to some of the level of pain I've had.
yes.
Most things will not even come close. And so that's my gauge. I'm sure you probably feel the same. Like, so unless and until something else hits the top of those things that have been the very worst things in my life, they just like really aren't that important.
And one of the things I've also learned is that, um, you know, everything's always worked out. Even during my, drunken debauched days, it's like I've always been taking care. I mean, I did the work, right? I showed up at the shitty waitressing jobs and stuff like that, but it's like I've always been taken care of. Things have always worked out. And it's very I don't live in fear anymore. I live with an enormous amount of
Hmm.
faith, even in the crazy world we live in now, where it feels like everything's going to hell in a handbasket. I'm alluding to politics without trying to talk about politics, but
Hmm.
it's like, it doesn't scare me.
Right.
It's going to work out. And plus I'm ancient, so it's like
Hmm.
I don't care what anybody thinks of me, you
Yeah.
know. So
And those are the blessings that I'm referring to. I mean, like, I feel like we just get to be completely different and really content in our own skin, at
yes,
this age. I just feel like, wow. Like, I say all the time, and I remember saying, even when I was a little younger and earlier sobriety, when I was thinking, like, man, I wish I could give all of this to like my kid. Like, I want my girls to never have to like have all of those years of like worrying about what everybody thinks and like comparing to, but like, you can't like take it away from them. But I wish I could, because
right.
knowing what we know now, it's like, wow, you get to that other part and you're just, you do have a shift in priorities and a shift in focus and really the ability to be able to to discern at any given moment, like, how important is this? What is my experience with this from the past? Like, how do I know, how to handle this? I mean, like we have skills today,
Yes,
and then we can also always go back to basics. I've had the pleasure, I say, but it's also been very, very painful in some ways professionally working with two people who are in recovery, one for about a year probably now, and very just chronic relapse or constant. I mean, like a little bit older than me, my age, kids similar ages, and just, destroyed his life, still at his family kind of somehow, but just watching this man like constantly not get it has been just so, I don't know, one of my biggest challenges as a therapist, right? Because I know what I know. Obviously, he knows I'm in recovery. I self-disclose that all the time. We talk about that, but like, I just kind of want to be like, dude, what are you doing? But I also know that like nothing I do, I can't make anybody do anything or not do anything. And
Right.
so, I mean, so the pain of just kind of watching him and waiting until it was time, and I think we might be there, which is very interesting. And so now it's been a few months, like a few months, and we were talking last week, I guess, about a situation, and he presented the situation, and he was like, "Okay, this is what's happening," and he's like, "Oh, it's the first time I've had like real cravings. Like I was really, like I was feeling it. I was like, I was getting ready to get in the car, and I was like, okay." So, I mean, that's normal. And so then I said, "Well, what did you do?" And so he's telling me, he's like, "Oh, I started focusing on my breathing. I, he gave me like four or five things." And I
Oh,
said, "Oh, they were great. They were great things." And I said, "Well, did you call your sponsor?" And he's like, "Well, I did. I finally, like, he finally did. But then he didn't like share all of the
right,
thing. Like, he just called
right,
like a normal, like I'm calling you normally." And I was
right.
like, "Oh, yeah, cool. Like, tell me about that. Like, why didn't you feel like it was appropriate?" And it was very interesting to talk about that. So we talked that out, and I basically said, like, "Hey, like why don't we, this is all great, like such great stuff, super good tools, but like why don't we move that situation, that program up to the top? Like the next time when something's going on and you're having that, like let's move your program first. Like how about we just pick up that phone first? Like wouldn't that be like so much more amazing? Because then you're like on the phone with somebody, and I'm not saying you gotta say all the things, but you're talking it out, and
Oh no.
suddenly now you feel better."
Oh, when I was first around Alcoholics Anonymous, I said, you know, I don't know why AA works, but it has something to do with the chemical reaction between my ass and a metal chair. Because I don't want to go, and then I go there, right? And I walk out and I feel better. But
Right.
I tell you, it's like, and it's also why I like to say time doesn't matter. I don't care if you're 40 years sober. I've seen a lot of people with a lot of time that are assholes and jerks and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But what time has given me was, it's like when this thing happened and I got out of the nut house and I went to a meeting. I just, it's like, I don't know about you, but I am fighting for my life. I am fighting for my little alcoholic life, because at my baseline, I will do drugs and get drunk, and that's my favorite way to deal with stuff. Not anymore, really, but what I do now is I go to a meeting, or if I'm talking to somebody, I tell them the truth. I throw my guts on the floor, you know, and
Yeah.
it's like, here, because I was 23 years sober at the time. I'm like, here, I'm 23 years sober. And I just institutionalized myself
Yeah.
because, my wife doesn't love me anymore. Boo hoo. But, because I think that's what it's all about. It's like, why go to therapy if you're not going to tell your therapist
Yeah.
all the truth?
Right.
It's like, you don't hear it, they
Mm-hmm.
don't hear it. How are they supposed to help you? So, I love, I love doing this. It's like, what's the great Oscar Wilde quote? Um, be your, be yourself. Everybody else is already taken.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm gonna be me. I'm gonna be Emily, and
Mm-hmm.
throw my guts on the floor,
Yeah.
tell you the truth, and we're as sick as our secrets and all of that.
Yeah, I agree. I always say all the time, like, therapy only works if you're honest. And I told a lot of lies to a lot of therapists before I got here. And so when I landed in the hospital, my husband called that therapist and said, "My wife just tried to kill herself." I think she was like, like what? Because
What? Yeah.
she didn't know the whole truth, which
Right.
is such a shame. But it is what we do, what we think is you know, going to keep us well or whatever. I had issues with being well because I felt being well meant I was going to be fat. You know, I struggled with a lot. And so like I had a lot of that kind of stuff to work through. And that's why we layer it on, right? We can do AA or some other recovery program of your choice. And then you can start reading Quitlet. You can start doing meditation and yoga and workout and nutrition and therapy, and like start layering on all of the other amazing tools that we have in this life that can help us be well. There isn't just one way.
Self-discovery.
There isn't just one way. The way is whatever's going to make you well,
Yes.
and you're so right. There's a lot of people. My first sponsor told me to carry a big book around with me all the time. It keeps the crazies away because there was a lot of people in AA who come to AA a lot but are not well. Um, and
Well, think about where you are. This is not, aren't we fabulous anonymous? This is Alcoholics Anonymous. You're in a room full of alcoholics and drug addicts who are like, in varying stages of being, messed up, right?
Mhm.
So don't worry about what they're doing. Worry
Yeah,
about what you're doing, Tell your
yeah.
truth, share your truth. If somebody says something meaningful to you, listen, internalize, take it in. But
Hmm.
you can't do it just up here. It's not about being able to quote the book. It's about getting into your heart and your guts and your soul. Um, because otherwise it's going to break down. You're going to be in that scary place someday, and you have no defense against the first drink. So
And I feel like for me anyway, and I don't know about your experience, but it's been a really, really long time since I've thought about taking a drink or a drug. Like I was relieved of that from very, very early on, thank God. I was relieved of that obsession and compulsion early on. So that for a very long time, 2 decades, that has not been the center of my problem, right? And so
right,
for me, I become keenly aware of the fact that I'm not going to take a drink or a drug. I'm most certainly not. But there's a whole bunch of other crap that I will probably do that could be hurtful to me or you. And so that is where my priority lies. That is why I do the things. That is why I wake up in the morning and do the same things every single day. And then I go to bed and I do the same things every single day. And then I take care of myself and I try to live by, a lot of the 10th step and the 12 and 12. I mean, there's just things that I do in my life because I don't want to be an ass, right? I
well,
want to,
recognizing that you're trying to change the way you feel, right? It's like,
right.
AA says hungry, angry, lonely, tired, right? Am
Mhm.
I hungry? Am I pissed off and I
Mhm.
talk to somebody? Am I angry? Am I tired? It's like, have I done any exercise? Do I need
Yeah.
food? Do I just need to, relate to another human being? Do I
Yeah.
need to go to yoga class? Do I need to meditate? There's a lot of tools,
There
and
sure are. And also, I think one of the greatest things that I've really learned and kind of been marinating in a very kind of general way, and specifically sometimes over the last, I would say 5 to 10 years, but even more so recently, is just, that I like letting go of any kind of concept of reliance on anyone else to make you happy is has got to be squashed, right? So like if I'm constantly thinking like, oh, if you did this or if oh you just did that or whatever, that's going to make me content and peaceful and happy. That's a victim mentality. And so whether it's like the chaos of the world, you alluded to it earlier, whether
right,
it's this chaos and craziness that we view and we don't agree and blah 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 and everyone's entitled to have their own opinions about things and beliefs about
right,
stuff. That's the beautiful thing about being human. We all get to do
right,
that. But what we don't get to do is like make it other people's problem or a job to make us feel peaceful and content. And so today, the release of that has been, I would say, probably the greatest blessing. It's how I've stayed married for I don't know how many, a long, long time, many decades,
it's
because of a lot of acceptance around that. Like I've no
it's been the
longer,
greatest revelation of my life in the past, I'd say, year.
yeah.
Just, and part of that is by not being in a relationship. I mean, in true lesbian fashion, serial monogamy from relationship to relationship to relationship,
Hmm.
looking for love. But the problem is that, it's like now that I've, let myself stay single and focused on me, it's like, the whole concept of like self love. What the fuck is that? Well, you know what it is? What it is the key. It's like
Hmm.
I've discovered me. I'm a very good person. I'm smart. I'm kind. It's like I'm having a love affair with me for
Yeah.
the first time in my life.
Oh,
And now I won't be going into, if I meet somebody or get into a relationship, I won't be looking for something from that other person.
Right.
It's like I have it inside myself.
Hmm.
It's like I don't know if I'm saying that very well, but
You are, yeah.
um,
I think that, I mean, this has been a topic of conversation in my family too, because my girls are 21 and 20, my son is 17, but they're in college and they don't really date that much because they don't seem super interested, but they have a little bit. But one of the things I talk to them about a lot, and I talk about in my work with women in my room is, we're not looking for the other half. We're not looking for complete me. We're not
there
looking
is no
for,
other
oh,
half.
it's none of that. We're looking for complement. We're looking for come alongside. Who can
Yeah,
we do life with? Who
right.
aligns mostly with us that we can tolerate and be relatively happy with, that we can have a life with that doesn't have anything to do with completing you,
Right.
where we want them to complement us,
And
yes.
there's no need.
And I really said that. I've said that several times to one in particular, and I've said, like, we're not looking for a project. We're not looking for potential. We're looking for partnership. And
And
it's
I've
hard
been
to
doing
understand what
projects
that
my whole
is.
life.
It's hard to know what that is when you're 20.
Right,
But I feel like at least using that kind of language now might be helpful because the reality of relationships, as you know, is that it's really actually not that fun most of the time. I mean, it's sort of love. We love each other, but that's actually not it. It's really just a lot of tolerance and acceptance. And yes, we have fun. Yes, there's love, but it's a lot of uncomfortableness. And who can sit with you while your mom is dying at the hospital?
right,
Who's going to show up while your kid, is being diagnosed with a terminal illness? I mean, like, can these people do that? Can this
right,
person do that? Yes or no? Because
right.
that's what life is. It's not all like rainbows and sunshine and like we have hot sex all the time and it's beautiful. And no, it's actually just not. And I think that illusion has to be squashed. This sort of fantasy tale that has, I think, society created and has allowed to, like, I don't know, blow up for years. But I'm here to squash it. I'm just kidding. Anyway, well, listen, it's been great chatting with you. I wish we could
Thank
keep
you.
talking. I'm sure we would have so many more areas to go. But why don't you tell people where they can find you if they want to reach out or get your book? How do you like to connect?
Um, well, let's see. My name is Emily Sayre Smith, and it's EmilYSayre I wrote a book. It's called Smartass, Memoir of a Mouthy Girl. You can buy it on Amazon or at Barnes and Noble or things like that. Um, and I have an author's page on Facebook, and I have a web page, which is really very pathetic because I haven't done the work on it yet. So I think if you want to find me, Facebook and Smartass Memoir of a Mouthy Girl is they're probably the best ways to find me and get a hold of me. So
Okay, I'll make sure I link to all that stuff below in the show notes. And
thank you.
thank you again so much for joining me. It's been a super fun conversation, and I hope you have a fantastic day.